What happens if you pour worm castings tea into your coneflower plant? I'm not talking about a light sprinkle of compost on top of the soil. I'm talking about a real brewed liquid feed poured straight into the root zone. Most gardeners think of worm castings as this nice-to-have extra, something you toss on once and forget about. But when you actually understand what's happening underground after you apply it, you'll never look at your coneflowers the same way again. Stick around, because by the end of this video, you'll know exactly what this simple liquid can do and exactly how it can backfire if you get it wrong. Before we dig in, if you're someone who wants your garden to actually thrive instead of just survive, hit that subscribe button right now. I share practical, no-nonsense growing tips every single week, and trust me, you don't want to miss the next one. Okay, let's get into it. So let's talk about what's actually inside worm castings tea, because this isn't just worm poop water, even though that's technically what it is. Worm castings are the finished product of earthworms digesting organic matter, leaves, food scraps, plant debris, and what comes out the other end is one of the most nutrient-dense, biologically active materials you can put in a garden. When you soak those castings in water and let them steep, you're pulling all of that goodness out into a liquid form that plants can absorb almost immediately. First, let's talk minerals. Worm castings are naturally rich in nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, the same three nutrients you see listed on every bag of fertilizer, often shortened to NPK. But here's the key difference. In worm castings, these nutrients aren't in a harsh, synthetic, immediately dissolvable form. They're bound up in organic material that gets released slowly and gently. Nitrogen is what fuels leafy green growth and helps the plant build proteins and chlorophyll, basically the plant's ability to photosynthesize and turn sunlight into energy. Phosphorus is critical for root development and for flower and seed production, which matters a lot for a flowering plant like coneflower. Potassium helps regulate water movement within the plant, strengthens stems, and improves overall disease resistance. Beyond the big three, worm castings also carry a solid dose of calcium and magnesium. Calcium is like the structural framework of a plant. It strengthens cell walls, which means sturdier stems and better resistance to disease and pest damage. Magnesium sits at the center of the chlorophyll molecule, so without enough of it, a plant literally cannot photosynthesize efficiently, and you'll see pale yellowing leaves as a result. But the real magic of worm castings tea isn't just the minerals, it's the biology. As worms digest organic matter, their gut environment multiplies beneficial microbes by the billions. When you brew castings into a tea, you're essentially creating a living soup of bacteria and fungi. These microbes do something incredible once they hit the soil. They colonize the root zone and create a protective barrier around the roots, crowding out harmful pathogens before they even get a chance to attack. They also help break down organic matter in the soil into forms the plant can actually use, acting like tiny recycling plants working around the clock. On top of that, worm castings contain natural plant growth hormones, auxins, and cytokinins that worms produce during digestion. These hormones stimulate root growth and cell division, meaning the plant doesn't just get fed, it gets an actual physiological signal to grow stronger and faster. And finally, there are trace micronutrients, zinc, iron, manganese, copper, present in small but meaningful amounts. These are the nutrients plants need in tiny doses, but absolutely cannot skip, because they're involved in enzyme functions that keep the whole plant running smoothly. So in short, worm castings tea isn't one thing. It's a mineral supplement, a microbial inoculant, and a natural hormone boost, all delivered in one simple liquid. Now let's flip over to the coneflower itself, because understanding what this plant actually craves is what makes this whole equation click into place. Coneflower, you probably know it by its botanical name, Echinacea, is a tough, resilient perennial. It's known for being drought-tolerant and low maintenance, which sometimes tricks gardeners into thinking it doesn't need much feeding at all. But low maintenance doesn't mean no nutrition required. It just means coneflower is efficient with what it's given, and that's exactly why feeding it the right way produces such visible, satisfying results. Coneflower's biggest need is a steady, moderate supply of nitrogen, but here's the catch. Too much nitrogen, especially from fast-release synthetic sources, pushes the plant into producing excessive leafy growth at the expense of flowers. This is where worm castings shine because the nitrogen they provide is slow and gentle, supporting healthy foliage without overwhelming the plant or sacrificing blooms. This lines up perfectly with what we just talked about. Worm castings release nitrogen gradually through microbial breakdown, rather than dumping it all at once. Next, phosphorus. This is arguably the single most important nutrient for coneflower because it directly drives flower and root development. Coneflowers are prized for their big, bold, daisy-like blooms with that signature raised center cone, and phosphorus is the nutrient responsible for making that happen. Weak phosphorus levels typically show up as fewer blooms, smaller flower heads, or stunted root systems that struggle to support the plant through drought or stress. And as we covered, phosphorus is one of the core minerals present in worm castings, so the connection here is direct and obvious. Potassium is the third major piece of the puzzle. Coneflower is often grown in tough conditions, full sun, dry soil, wind exposure, and potassium is what helps the plant regulate its internal water pressure, keeping stems upright and strong even during heat stress. It also plays a major role in helping the plant resist common fungal issues like powdery mildew, something coneflower can be prone to in humid climates. Again, this maps directly onto what worm castings provide. Calcium matters here too. Coneflower has relatively thick, fibrous stems, and calcium is essential for building strong cell walls throughout that structure. Plants low in calcium often show weak, floppy stems or stunted new growth at the tips, since calcium doesn't move easily through the plant and needs a constant fresh supply. Finally, coneflower benefits enormously from a healthy, active soil microbiome. This plant naturally partners with beneficial soil fungi and bacteria in what's called a symbiotic relationship, where the microbes help the plant access nutrients and water more efficiently in exchange for sugars the plant produces. This is precisely why the microbial life in worm castings tea is such a perfect match. You're not just feeding the plant directly, but you're feeding the underground ecosystem that the coneflower depends on to feed itself. When you apply worm castings tea correctly, the benefits are genuinely impressive. You'll typically see richer green foliage, stronger and thicker stems, more abundant blooming, and a plant that handles heat and drought stress noticeably better than untreated coneflowers nearby. Because the nutrients are released slowly and biologically, there's no harsh shock to the plant, just steady, sustained improvement. Many growers also report better resistance to common coneflower problems like aster yellows and powdery mildew, likely thanks to that boosted microbial defense system we talked about earlier. But here's where I need you to pay close attention, because this is where a lot of well-meaning gardeners go wrong. Worm castings tea is gentle compared to synthetic fertilizers. Yes, but gentle does not mean impossible to overdo. If you brew the tea too concentrated or apply it too frequently, you can actually create a nitrogen imbalance that pushes the plant into excessive leafy growth while sacrificing flower production, the exact opposite of what most people want from their coneflowers. There's also a real risk with timing and moisture. If you apply the tea to soil that's already waterlogged or during a period of heavy rain, you risk suffocating the root zone and encouraging root rot, since coneflower genuinely prefers well-drained conditions and doesn't like sitting in soggy soil. Applying it during peak afternoon heat can also stress the plant, especially if any of the liquid splashes onto the leaves and then sits under direct sun, which can cause leaf scorch. And one more critical warning, never apply concentrated, unfinished, or improperly brewed castings tea directly to young or newly transplanted coneflowers. Their root systems are simply too delicate at that stage, and even a gentle feed can overwhelm them. Done right, this is one of the safest natural boosts you can give your coneflower. Done carelessly, it can genuinely set your plant back weeks or worse. All right, let's get into exactly how to do this the right way, step by step. Step 1. Gather your material. You'll need a handful of quality worm castings, about 1 to 2 cups for a standard 5-gallon bucket of water. You'll also need a porous bag or old cloth to hold the castings, a large bucket, a stick or paddle for stirring, and a watering can or garden sprayer for application. Step 2. Brew the tea. Place your worm castings into the porous bag and tie it off like a giant tea bag. Submerge it in your bucket of water, ideally dechlorinated water, so let tap water sit out for 24 hours first if that's what you're using. Chlorine can kill off the beneficial microbes we worked so hard to talk about earlier, so this step matters more than people think. Step 3. Let it steep. Allow the bag to sit in the water for 24 to 48 hours, stirring occasionally to help release the nutrients and encourage oxygen flow, which keeps the microbial life active and thriving. If you have access to an aquarium air pump, running it in the bucket during this time dramatically boosts the microbial population, but it's optional, not required. Step 4. Dilute if needed. If you brewed a strong batch, dilute it further with plain water until it reaches a light amber tea color, similar to weak iced tea. Going too dark and concentrated is one of the most common mistakes, so when in doubt, dilute more rather than less. Step 5. Apply directly to the soil. Pour the tea slowly around the base of the coneflower, focusing on the root zone rather than the crown of the plant. For an established coneflower, roughly 1 to 2 cups of tea is plenty per application. Avoid saturating the soil to the point of pooling water. A slow, even pour that soaks in naturally is exactly what you want. Step 6. Avoid the foliage. Try to keep the liquid off the leaves and flowers as much as possible, especially if you're applying during sunny conditions, to prevent any risk of leaf burn. Step 7. Water lightly afterward. A light watering after application helps carry the nutrients further down into the root zone, giving your coneflower even, gentle access to everything you just fed it. That's it. Simple, low cost, and incredibly effective when done with a bit of care and attention. Timing genuinely makes or breaks this whole process, so let's break down exactly when to use this and when to hold off. First, when not to apply worm castings tea. Avoid using it during periods of heavy rain or when the soil is already saturated, since adding more liquid on top of wet soil increases the risk of root rot. Skip application during the hottest part of the day, particularly in peak summer afternoons, since the combination of heat stress and fresh liquid feeding can shock the plant rather than help it. Also avoid feeding coneflower during the depths of winter dormancy. The plant isn't actively growing at that point, so it simply won't use the nutrients. And excess moisture around dormant roots in cold weather increases disease risk. Finally, hold off on very young seedlings or transplants for at least the first 2 to 3 weeks after planting, giving their root systems time to establish before introducing any additional feeding. Now, the ideal conditions. The best time to apply worm castings tea is in the early morning or early evening, when temperatures are cooler and the plant isn't under direct heat stress. This timing also gives the soil time to properly absorb the liquid before the sun's intensity increases evaporation. Seasonally, the best windows are early spring, right as new growth emerges and the plant is gearing up for its growing season, and again in early to midsummer, right before and during the primary blooming period, when phosphorus demand is at its highest. A light, gentle, overcast day is genuinely perfect timing if you can catch one. As for frequency, worm castings tea should be reapplied roughly every 3 to 4 weeks during the active growing season. This spacing gives the slow-release nutrients and microbial activity enough time to work through the soil naturally before adding more. Overdoing the frequency, applying it weekly, for example, doesn't speed up results. It just risks tipping that nutrient balance in the wrong direction, particularly toward excess nitrogen. Patience and consistency beat frequency every time with this method. So how long until you actually see something happen? Within the first 7 to 10 days, you'll typically notice the earliest signs, leaves taking on a slightly deeper, richer green color as chlorophyll production gets a boost, and the plant generally looking a bit more vibrant and perky, especially if it was previously looking a little tired or pale. By the 2 to 3 week mark, you'll start to see more substantial changes. New growth tends to come in noticeably stronger and thicker, stems gain rigidity, and if you're applying during the pre-bloom window, you'll often see an increase in flower bud formation. This is really the phosphorus boost showing itself in real time. By 4 to 6 weeks, especially with a second application in that window, most gardeners report the biggest visible payoff: more abundant blooming, larger flower heads, and a plant that visibly handles heat and dry spells with far less wilting or drooping than before. The overall plant structure often looks fuller and more resilient, standing upright with confidence rather than sagging under stress. It's a gradual, natural transformation, not an overnight miracle, but it's steady, visible, and genuinely satisfying to watch unfold. And that's the real story of what happens when you add worm castings to your coneflower, a simple, natural liquid that feeds the plant, feeds the soil, and feeds the living ecosystem underneath it all. As long as you respect the timing and the dosage, your coneflowers work hard to reward you with color and life all season long, and giving them this kind of thoughtful care is one of the easiest ways to help them thrive. If you found this valuable, do me a favor and hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and join me for the next video, because we've got a lot more practical, real-world growing tips coming your way. I'll see you in the next one.